The love that stayed, a journey from heartbreak to true connection. Before everything unraveled, there was a silence between us that didn't feel like distance. It felt like comfort, like the weightless kind of quiet you only find when you're sitting next to someone who knows every corner of your mind without needing to search. That was how we began, wrapped in a kind of invisible understanding, like an old thread we'd unknowingly tied around ourselves when we first met. I never imagined how that same thread could one day become a knot I couldn't untangle. It started in early spring, the kind that arrives late and only for a moment. The streets were still muddy from the melting snow, and the cold still bit the tips of my fingers through my jacket, but the air smelled different. Cleaner. Brighter. It was on one of those days when I met her. There wasn't a grand moment or a cinematic glance across a room. It was at a train station, waiting for a delayed afternoon local, surrounded by the low grumble of announcements and the hiss of old brakes. She sat beside me, pulled a book out of her coat pocket, and started reading like the world wasn't rushing by. That was the first thing I noticed. She wasn't trying to be anywhere else. Most people, they sit in waiting like they're bracing for impact. She just was. I didn't say anything at first. I glanced at the cover of her book, The Bell Jar, and felt the strange twist of familiarity. I'd read it too, years ago, and hated every page in the best way. When I did finally say something, it was about the train being late. Something ordinary, something stupid. But she looked up, smiled the kind of slow smile that pulls you in without warning, and said, "Good things come late sometimes." That was it. That was the moment. Not fireworks. Just that sentence. Like a dropped match in dry grass. From there, everything moved with a pace that didn't make sense. She was like gravity. I didn't mean to orbit her, I just did. We found reasons to run into each other again. Same trains, same coffee shop, same bookstore tucked between two office buildings where she once told me she liked to get lost on purpose. She was always saying things like that. Cryptic. Poetic. Like her thoughts lived in a language slightly out of reach. But I understood the shape of them, even if I didn't catch every word. Our first real conversation lasted 3 hours. We sat on a bench near the river, the sky growing dark behind us, our breath visible in the chilly dusk. She asked questions like she already knew the answers, like she wanted to see if I'd say the truth or something softer. I remember she asked me what I was most afraid of, and I lied. I said spiders. She didn't call me out, but she gave me a look that said she knew better. That night, when we parted, she didn't say goodbye. She said, "We'll see," and walked away with her hands deep in her pockets and her hair tangled from the wind. After that, she became part of my everyday. We didn't define it. We didn't say relationship or dating. We just existed next to each other like 2 pages from the same book. Separate, but part of the same story. We shared secrets and past hurts in half-lit rooms, in parked cars, in whispered fragments overheard at 2 a.m. She told me her father left when she was 9 and never called again. I told her my mother had depression, so thick it coated the walls of our house like mold. We didn't console each other. We just listened, like holding up mirrors to our broken parts. There was laughter too. Unfiltered, stomach-aching laughter over dumb things. She once tried to make pancakes and ended up setting off the fire alarm. We danced in her kitchen to cover the sound, both of us waving dish towels at the ceiling, smoke curling around our heads. I think that was the first night I fell asleep with her heartbeat in my ear. It was like listening to something ancient and permanent. But even then, there were cracks. Small ones. She never liked to talk about the future. Anytime I brought up next month or next year, she'd go quiet, not distant, just still, like she was trying not to shake the snow globe of the present. I ignored it at first. I thought maybe she needed more time, maybe she was afraid. I didn't push, but the thread began to stretch slowly. Invisible tension. Little things that didn't hurt until they did. One night, after a movie, I brought up the idea of a weekend trip together, something simple. A cabin in the woods. Just us, a fire, some wine, no phones. She smiled, but it didn't reach her eyes. She said she'd think about it, and she did. She thought about it for 3 weeks. Every time I brought it up, she had a new excuse. Busy with work, not feeling well. She never said no, but she never said yes either. Eventually, I stopped asking. It wasn't about the cabin. It was what the cabin meant. Planning something. Sharing something that hadn't happened yet. She lived in the moment with a kind of ferocity that made it hard to imagine she'd ever plan anything further than tomorrow's coffee order. And I wanted roots. I didn't need a ring or a mortgage or some 5-year blueprint. But I needed to know she'd still be there if I reached out next week. Next month. Next time I closed my eyes. I remember the first time I felt truly alone, even though she was right beside me. We were lying in her bed, the moonlight sliding across the hardwood floor, her fingers loosely resting on my chest. It should have been perfect, but something in her had drifted. Her breathing was slow, steady, but I could tell her thoughts were already elsewhere. I stared at the ceiling and tried to match her rhythm, like if I could breathe like her. I could understand what she was hiding. She never cheated. Not like that. But she began to disappear in ways that didn't leave evidence. She stopped texting me in the middle of the day. Our conversations grew shorter, our meetings less frequent. When we did talk, it was surface level. I'd ask how her day was, and she'd say, fine. No stories, no tangents, no poetry. I missed her even when she was in the room, and I hated myself for not knowing what I did wrong. I tried to bring it up. Once, we were walking by the canal, and I said, I feel like you're slipping away. She looked at me with those wide eyes that once held the universe and said, maybe I was never really there. Then she kissed me. Softly, gently, like an apology, and kept walking. I stood there for a long time, watching her disappear into the evening. Still, I stayed. I stayed because love, when it's real, makes you believe it can bend without breaking. That if you just love someone hard enough, long enough, they'll choose to stay. That was my mistake. Thinking love was enough, thinking she wanted the same kind of forever I did. She never said she did. I just hoped it into existence. Hope can be heavy. It drags behind you like a shadow you can't outrun. I carried it for months through every half conversation and every unsent message. I told myself to be patient, that she'd come back, that she just needed time. But time isn't a cure when someone's heart is already somewhere else. The last time I saw her, it was raining. Not the dramatic, stormy kind of rain. Just a quiet, persistent drizzle that made the world look soft and tired. She stood across from me, hair wet, arms crossed like she was trying to hold herself together. She didn't cry. She didn't yell. She just said, I'm sorry I can't be what you need, and that was it. No fight. No grand goodbye. Just a thread snapping somewhere I couldn't see. She walked away, and I let her. Not because I didn't love her, but because I finally realized love can't live where there's no room for it to grow. I watched her until she turned the corner, until the echo of her footsteps vanished into the wet silence. That night, I went home and sat in the dark for a long time. I thought about all the moments that led to that one. The book, the pancakes, the almost cabin. And I understood something I hadn't before. Some people come into your life not to stay, but to teach you how to let go. And that's what she did. She taught me that love is not always reciprocal, that some people will hold your heart like it's glass but never plan to keep it. And sometimes that's okay, because even if the thread breaks, the mark it leaves on your skin proves it was once real. And that's a kind of beauty too. There's a strange kind of aftermath that follows a quiet goodbye. Not the kind that explodes, but the kind that lingers in corners, settles into pillows, drips slowly into your routines like ink in water. After she left, I didn't cry right away. I didn't scream or punch walls or throw things. I just sat with the silence she left behind, and for a while, it sounded exactly like her. Mornings were the worst. The way the light came in through the blinds hadn't changed, but it landed differently, like even the sun had adjusted itself to her absence. I kept reaching for my phone before remembering there was no one waiting on the other end. I still made 2 cups of coffee out of habit. Still checked my messages even when I knew she wasn't going to reply. My body hadn't caught up to the reality my heart was trying to accept. People talk about heartbreak like it's sharp and sudden, like a bone snapping. But for me, it was dull. A slow erosion. A quiet undoing. I started measuring time in the space between distractions. Work became a sanctuary, not because I loved it, but because it gave my hands something to do while my heart waited for news it would never receive. I buried myself in tasks, meetings, endless documents, and half-finished reports, just to avoid the echo inside me. But she found her way in anyway. Every now and then, something would trigger her memory. A stranger's perfume, the sound of rain on windows, a quote from a book we once discussed, and suddenly I'd be spiraling backward into a moment I wasn't ready to revisit. The human mind is cruel that way. It remembers in full color what you desperately want to forget. Eventually, friends noticed, or at least pretended to. They asked how I was, with the kind of tone that meant they already assumed the answer. I gave them pieces of the truth. Never the whole thing. It didn't work out. We wanted different things. She wasn't ready. I didn't tell them how I still saw her in crowds, how sometimes I'd walk into a room and swear I could smell her shampoo, how the weight of her ghost was heavier than her presence ever was. That kind of grief isn't easy to explain, because it's not just the loss of a person, it's the loss of who you were with them. The version of yourself that only existed in their orbit. And now that orbit was gone. Weeks passed, then months. I tried dating again half-heartedly, downloaded the apps, swiped, chatted, even met a few people. But it was like trying to eat when you're not hungry. Every conversation felt rehearsed, every smile felt borrowed. I was chasing the shape of something I used to know, and everything else felt counterfeit. No one made me feel the way she did. No one disarmed me with a sentence. No one made silence feel like a language. I knew it wasn't fair, to them or to me, but I couldn't help it. I was still walking through a museum of memories, touching frames that no longer held pictures. I tried to change things. Rearranged my apartment. Moved the couch to a different wall. Bought a new set of sheets. Donated the mugs we used to argue over. Burned the candle she left behind, even though the smell almost knocked me down. I told myself this was progress. That healing was just a series of tiny goodbyes. And in some ways, it worked. The memory stopped sneaking up on me every day. Some days I even forgot to think about her until the sun went down. I thought maybe I was getting better, that I was finally turning the page. But life, in its cruel genius, knows exactly when to twist the knife. It was late autumn when I saw her again. Of course it was. The city was draped in orange and gray, like it was mourning something too. I was at a bookstore downtown, one we used to visit. I went there out of some twisted sense of nostalgia, thinking I could reclaim the space. And then, as I turned into the poetry easel, there she was. Same hair, a little longer. Same posture, hunched over a shelf like she was trying to memorize the titles with her fingers. I froze. My heart didn't just skip, it panicked. She hadn't seen me yet. I had a second, maybe 2, to disappear. But I didn't move. I couldn't. Because for the first time in months, the thread between us pulled tight again. Not with hope. With H, she turned. Our eyes met, and for a moment we were back there in the station in her kitchen, by the river. She smiled, hesitant, gentle. Like she was afraid she'd break something just by acknowledging me. I walked toward her without deciding to. We didn't hug, we didn't touch. Just stood there. 2 people who had once been everything, and now weren't even acquaintances. "Hey," she said, like we'd only been apart for a weekend. I said it back. The silence stretched. Comfortable, then awkward, then sharp. We talked, not about us, just about now. She was doing freelance work. Travel reading more. Said she was happy, but her eyes darted away when she said it. I told her I was still at the same job. Mentioned I'd picked up running again. We laughed about how I always hated running. It felt almost normal. But underneath it, there was a current, a mutual knowing. We were both standing in the ruins, pretending the foundation wasn't cracked. Then she said something I didn't expect. "I think about you sometimes." Just like that. Quiet. Clean. Like she was handing me a stone she'd been carrying for too long. I didn't know what to say, because I thought about her too, all the time. But what would be the point of saying it? We were no longer those people. We didn't exist in the same world anymore. So I just nodded. She reached into her bag and pulled out a small book, Letters to a Young Poet. Held it out to me. "I was going to buy this for someone, but I think maybe it was always yours." I took it. Our fingers brushed. And just like that, the thread tightened again. Just enough to hurt. We didn't make plans. Didn't exchange numbers. Just parted with a soft goodbye and the weight of everything unsaid. That night, I read the book cover to cover. There was a passage that caught me off guard. Love consists in this, that two solitudes protect and touch and greet each other. And I realized something. She had always been a solitude, and I had tried to make her a permanence. The months that followed were different, softer. I didn't stop missing her, but I stopped waiting for her. I let her live in the place where certain songs go, where smells and colors live, where moments are allowed to stay moments. I stopped trying to explain our story to anyone. I stopped needing it to have a resolution. Some loves aren't meant to last forever. Some are just meant to teach you how deeply you can feel. I met someone new eventually. She wasn't like her. She didn't speak in riddles or vanish into her thoughts mid-sentence. She was simple, honest, steady. At first, I didn't trust it. I kept waiting for the twist, the silence, the absence. But it didn't come. She stayed. And slowly, I began to understand that love didn't have to feel like drowning to be real. That stability isn't a lack of passion. It's a different kind of fire, one that warms instead of burns. Still, on certain nights, I find myself reaching for that book. The pages are worn now, the spine cracked, but I keep it on my nightstand as a reminder. Not of her, exactly, but of what she gave me. She taught me that love is not ownership. That timing can be its own kind of villain. That some people arrive in your life not to stay, but to stir, to awaken, to teach you how to love in the aftermath. And even now, when I close my eyes and remember her voice, I no longer feel loss. I feel gratitude, because some threads don't have to stay tied to be sacred. Some simply pass through you, changing your shape forever. And maybe that's what she was, a shapeshifter, a storm, a poem, a thread between who I was and who I am becoming. Healing, they say, is never linear. It loops back on itself, doubles over in places, and stabs you with memories when you least expect them. After that brief encounter in the bookstore, something inside me shifted, not in the dramatic, cathartic way movies pretend heartbreak concludes, but in the quieter, stranger way that real healing begins. For weeks, I carried that book she handed me like it was alive. Not because of what was inside it, but because of what it represented. Unfinished conversations, the quiet truth she couldn't say out loud, and maybe, just maybe, the last thing she would ever give me. I didn't open it for days after we met. I left it on my nightstand untouched, like a candle I wasn't ready to light. But eventually curiosity cracked my resolve. Inside, between the pages, I found a folded note I hadn't noticed at first. It was small, torn from some notebook, with her handwriting curling softly across the paper. It read, "Some people aren't meant to stay, but that doesn't mean they didn't love you. Thank you for teaching me how to be seen." No name, no date, just that. I stared at it for a long time, reread it until the words stopped feeling like language and more like water. There it was, confirmation. She had loved me, or something close enough to it. And maybe that should have been enough. Maybe in another life, in another city, in another timeline where she wasn't afraid of roots, it would have been. But we don't get to live those other lives. We only get this one. And in this one, she left. Again. And this time, I knew she wasn't coming back. That realization didn't devastate me like I thought it would. Instead, it left a calm H. The kind you get from stretching a sore muscle. Painful, but somehow necessary. Like something was being realigned inside me. It was the first time I didn't feel haunted by what could have been. I simply accepted what was. And then something unexpected happened. It started with a message. Innocent, almost forgettable. A girl I barely remembered from university reached out. Her name was Clara. We had taken a creative writing elective together years ago, but hadn't spoken since. She found me through a shared social media group and messaged something simple. "Hey, I saw your post about that new poetry collection. If you're ever going to the launch, let me know. I've been looking for someone to go with." I stared at the message for hours before replying. Not because I was unsure, but because for the first time, I realized how cautious I'd become. How I was weighing every interaction against the ghost of someone who wasn't mine anymore. But Clara didn't ask for that comparison. She just wanted company. So I said yes. We met in a dimly lit venue tucked between a gallery and a bakery. The kind of place that smelled like old wood and coffee. She waved the moment she saw me, and something about her smile made the whole place feel warmer. We talked through the entire event, whispered commentary between readings, shared quiet laughs over abstract verses, and by the end of the night, I realized I hadn't thought about her once. Not the girl from before, not the heartbreak, not the thread. Just this moment. Clara, she wasn't like her. She didn't speak in metaphors or pull me into emotional labyrinths. She was clear, present, and unashamedly open. With her, conversations didn't feel like puzzles. They flowed like rivers, natural, steady, deep. At first, I didn't know how to trust that. I kept waiting for a shift, a distance, a disappearing act. But Clara wasn't a storm. She was sun through leaves, a warmth that didn't ask for explanation. Slowly, she started to fill spaces in my life that had felt empty for too long. We took things slow, not because either of us wanted to, but because I needed to. She never rushed me, never asked me to talk about the past, but when I did, she listened without flinching. When I told her about the girl at the train station, the one who read Plath and kissed like a question mark, she didn't get jealous. She didn't compare herself. She just took my hand and said, "That must have hurt a lot. I'm glad you're still here." It was that simple. Over the next few months, we built something different. Not a replica of what I lost, but a completely new architecture. One with doors that stayed open, with walls that didn't trap but held, with laughter that didn't come with conditions. We took walks in the rain, not because it was poetic, but because she forgot her umbrella and said, "Why not?" We cooked together, badly at first, and made a game out of who could burn less toast. We danced in our socks on wooden floors, and for the first time in years, I stopped performing for someone's approval. I just existed. And she met me there. I began to understand that love isn't about grand gestures. It's about the grocery runs, the shared playlists, the way she always poured my tea first, the way she remembered to turn the pillow over to the cold side before I even asked. Love, real love, is in the details you forget to notice until you realize you'd miss them if they disappeared. Of course, there were still ghosts. Healing doesn't erase the past. It just dulls its edges. I still had days where I thought of her, still flinched when a stranger wore her perfume, still wondered if she ever read Letters to a Young Poet, and thought of me. But those moments stopped being traps. They became memories like old photographs in a box I didn't have to open every day. Then came the letter. It arrived on a Wednesday. No return address. Just my name, written in that familiar handwriting I'd once memorized. I hesitated before opening it, heart pounding like it had ruined the clock. Inside was a single page. No greeting, no sign-off, just this: "I saw you at the poetry event. You were laughing. I wasn't supposed to be there, but I was. You looked happy, really happy." I waited for something to rise in me. Jealousy, regret, anything. But all I felt was stillness. I don't know if that means I've let go or if I've simply become a stranger to myself. I'm writing this not to come back, but to say thank you. You loved me when I couldn't love myself. You held me when I was hollow. And even though I couldn't stay, you made me feel, for a while, like I was whole. I hope she's kind. I hope she gives you everything I couldn't. And I hope, someday, when the thread between us finally disappears, it leaves behind something soft. Then I read it once, then again. Then I set it down, breathed deeply, and let the silence fill the room. There were no tears, no need to reply, no just an ending I didn't know I needed. Closure not in the form of reunion, but in the form of release. Clara came over later that evening. I told her about the letter. She didn't flinch. She simply curled beside me on the couch, took my hand and said, "Then maybe now you're free." And she was right, because in that moment I felt it. The final thread dissolving, not snapping, not breaking, just quietly letting go. And with that, the past became the past. We went on with our lives. We traveled. We built rituals. We made new memories that didn't have her name tucked in their corners. And though I never forgot what was, I stopped needing to carry it. Because love isn't about holding on to the people who leave. It's about learning how to hold the ones who stay. There's a moment in every long relationship where the days begin to blend. Not because they are dull, but because they are full of a gentle rhythm that no longer startles you. You wake up beside someone whose breathing is familiar, whose presence no longer demands performance, but offers peace. Clara and I reached that rhythm slowly, like a song we were learning together without realizing. It wasn't fireworks anymore. It was warmth, a steady burn instead of a spark. And yet, even that kind of warmth comes with shadows. I wish I could say that love, when real, smooths out all the wrinkles. But the truth is, love is not the absence of struggle. It's the commitment to stay even when things become unclear. We had been together for nearly a year when things began to shift. Not dramatically, nothing collapsed. But there were little changes. Missed calls. Delayed replies. Hesitations in her voice when she said, "I'm fine." I recognized those signs. I had lived them before. But this time, I didn't ignore them. I asked. I listened. I showed up. Still, something in her was drifting. At first, I thought it was stress. Her job had become overwhelming. She was working late more often, distracted during dinners, scrolling through emails even while we watched movies. I didn't mind at first. We all go through phases. But this one lingered. One night, we sat on the floor of our living room eating takeout, and I told her I missed her. Not in the desperate way, but in the soft, sad way you miss someone even when they're still in the room. She looked at me, startled, like she didn't know she'd gone anywhere. She put down her chopsticks, reached for my hand, and said, "I know. I felt far from myself lately. I'm sorry." It wasn't a fix, but it was honest. And that mattered. For a while, things got better. We took a trip upstate. Stayed in a small Airbnb with a fireplace and a deck that looked over a quiet lake. We cooked together, read books in the sun, played board games late into the night. We even talked about moving in together properly. Finding a place that was ours instead of mine. She sketched dream layouts on napkins where her plants would go, what color the kitchen tiles should be. I believed we were solid again. I believed we had weathered something. But love, as I've come to learn, isn't always undone by the big things. Sometimes it's the small things left unsaid that chip away at it. I started noticing patterns. Clara withdrawing again, only this time with a practiced smile. She became harder to read, not cold, not cruel, just quiet, more like a whisper of herself. And no matter how many times I reached out, she would only let me so far in. Then one evening, I came home to find her already there, lights dimmed, a cup of tea untouched on the table. She was sitting on the couch, looking out the window, and I just knew that something was ending. I sat beside her, not touching her yet, waiting for her to speak. When she finally did, her voice was small. "I've been offered a job, abroad." My stomach tightened. I didn't ask where, I just asked. "One." She didn't look at me. "They need someone to start in 3 weeks." There are moments where time slows down, not in a dramatic cinematic way, but in the cruel, suspended way of dread. I felt everything inside me pause. Not out of anger, but confusion. I thought we had passed this phase of running, of vanishing. I thought we were building something rooted, and maybe we were, but not for both of us. I asked her the question I was terrified to hear the answer to. "Do you want to go?" She turned to face me then, and I saw it. The glint of hope, the fear, the guilt. "I think I need to." That was it. No speech, no justifications, just truth. Honest, simple, shattering. We didn't break up that night. We held each other in silence, like trying to slow the inevitable. But the days that followed were a blur of half-packed bags, soft apologies, and unanswered questions. She tried to reassure me, said it wasn't about us, said she loved me, said she just needed this for herself. And I believed her. That was the worst part. There was no betrayal, no lie. Just life unfolding in a direction I hadn't predicted. A week before her flight, we had dinner with some friends. Smiled through toasts, played along with jokes, pretended everything was fine. But I could feel it. Her hand slipping from mine beneath the table, her eyes searching places I couldn't follow. That night, back at our place, I sat by the window while she packed. She asked me to help fold her clothes, but my hands refused. I watched instead. Watched as she neatly folded shirts we bought together, packed books we read in bed, slipped in the photo of us by the lake without a word. I wanted to scream, to beg, to throw it all on the floor and make her stay. But I didn't. Because I loved her. And real love doesn't cage. It lets go when it has to. The morning of her flight, she hugged me at the terminal and said, "This doesn't have to be goodbye." But it was. We both knew. She kissed me like she had the first time, soft, full of questions. And then she was gone, just like that. A thread unraveling. The first few days, I kept checking my phone. Not because I expected anything, but because habits don't die easily. I kept her mug on the shelf, her plant on the sill, her books stacked by the bed. It took weeks before I moved them, even longer before I stopped waking up expecting to find her beside me. I told myself I was okay, that I understood, that this wasn't a betrayal, but a choice. And yet, grief doesn't listen to logic. It creeps in through cracks you didn't know were there. People asked if we were still in touch. I said yes at first, then no, because a few texts don't count as connection. Not when they're polite, measured, empty. She sent a photo once, her new view, a small apartment overlooking cobbled streets. I stared at it for too long. Tried to imagine her life without me in it. Tried to picture a version of her that didn't know how I liked my coffee or which shoulder I slept on. It felt like watching someone else's dream. But as time passed, the ache softened. I started writing again. Something I hadn't done since before Clara. Not poetry, not stories, just letters. Letters I never sent. Letters to her, to myself, to the version of us I thought would last. I filled notebooks with things I wished I'd said, things I was glad I didn't. It became therapy of sorts, a way to mourn what never became. And slowly, I started rebuilding. Not moving on, just moving forward. I joined a writing group, took long walks without destinations, spent weekends in bookstores, not looking for anyone, just losing myself in spines and silence. I stopped checking her socials, deleted our chats, let the silence return, not as punishment, but as peace. One day I found a photo of us tucked in an old jacket pocket. It was from that cabin trip. We were both laughing mid-motion, some private joke caught in a blur. I stared at it, waiting for the usual sting. But it didn't come, just a softness, a gentle nostalgia. I placed it in a box labeled before, not to forget, but to remember without H. Because the truth is, not all love stories end in bitterness. Some just end. And that's enough. Clara was a chapter. A beautiful, messy, honest chapter. And maybe that's all we were ever meant to be. Not a forever, but a reminder. That love can be steady. That trust can be rebuilt. That it's possible to start again. And as I stood there, watching the sun set from the same window where we once planned a life together, I realized the thread hadn't broken. It had simply changed hands. Time, when it truly begins to pass, does not warn you. It doesn't arrive in loud markers or sudden shifts. It simply slips between one moment and the next, erasing the tension from your shoulders and the sharpness from your memories. Months had moved on since Clara boarded that plane, and with each week, her absence had grown quieter, less jagged. I stopped recounting the day she left. I no longer tracked what she might be doing, what the weather was like where she lived, or whether the street outside her apartment still filled with leaves in autumn. I didn't forget her. I never would. But the chapter we wrote together now closed with a period, not an ellipsis. What surprised me most was how life began to feel not just normal again, but full. Not in the same way, not with the same colors or melodies, but with new rhythms, new faces, new possibilities. I discovered something unexpected in that stillness. Myself. Without the constant weight of someone else's presence, I started hearing my own thoughts again, not the ones shaped by shared decisions or quiet compromises. Just mine. It was disorienting at first. The silence in my apartment became deafening, but then I started to fill it. Not with noise, but with intention. I began reading again, not to escape, but to explore. Old books I never finished. New ones I had once thought I'd read together with someone. I picked up photography, wandered through forgotten neighborhoods with a second-hand camera, searching for moments most people walk past. I spent weekends in art galleries, listening to strangers discuss brushstrokes and perspective, silently adding my own thoughts to the collective hum of curiosity. It felt like rediscovering the joy of being alone without being lonely. Then, unexpectedly, I met Elle. I wasn't looking. If anything, I was more closed than ever. Love had become a mountain I admired from a distance, not something I had the energy to climb again. But Elle didn't arrive like the others. She didn't appear in a bookstore or on a train platform. She didn't drop metaphors in casual conversation or quote dead poets. No. She entered my life with a spilled coffee on a Wednesday. It was a small cafe I had started frequenting during my morning walks. The kind with cracked floor tiles and chipped mugs, where the barista always remembered your name and the music was stuck perpetually in a 2007 indie loop. I was balancing my drink, keys, and a book under one arm when someone collided into me by the door. The coffee leapt from my hand, cascading over both of us in a warm, chaotic splash. My first instinct was frustration, but when I looked up, there she was, drenched in almond milk and horror, mouthing rapid apologies. We both stood there, dripping, ridiculous, stunned. Then we laughed. Real, unfiltered laughter that echoed through the tiny cafe and earned curious glances from the few regulars seated nearby. She offered to buy me a replacement. I told her it wasn't necessary. She insisted. We sat down, drying ourselves with napkins, and in between self-deprecating jokes, we introduced ourselves. Elle. Me, a moment born out of clumsiness. That conversation, unplanned, unguided, lasted nearly 2 hours. She was different in all the ways that mattered. She wasn't guarded or mysterious. She didn't treat vulnerability like currency or affection like a negotiation. She simply existed. Fully. Honestly. She told me she worked as a museum archivist and had an unhealthy obsession with fountain pens. She hated small talk but loved obscure documentaries. She had never read The Bell Jar and said Sylvia Plath always sounded like a woman who needed a hug and a glass of wine. I laughed harder than I had in months. We didn't exchange numbers that day. Instead, she wrote her email address on the back of a bookstore receipt with one of her fountain pens and told me to write her a letter. Not a message, not a text, a letter. And I did. It felt strange at first, handwriting something that wasn't a journal entry or a grocery list. But once the words began to flow, I remembered how much power lives in the slowness of ink and paper. I told her about the books I was reading, the photographs I had taken, even a dream I'd had about running through an endless field barefoot, chasing nothing. I signed it with just my first name and dropped it in the mailbox without expecting anything. She replied 5 days later, 3 pages, neatly folded, tucked in an envelope that smelled faintly of eucalyptus. Thus began our epistolary romance. For weeks, we exchanged letters like schoolchildren, No emojis, no read receipts, no instant gratification. Just words written slowly and deliberately, meant to be read, not skimmed. We learned about each other not through algorithms or filters, but through stories. Raw, messy, beautifully human stories. She told me about her father's garden, about losing her sister, about the scar on her left wrist from a childhood accident. I told her about Clara, about the thread that began with someone else and how it had reshaped me. Elle didn't flinch. She didn't compare. She didn't ask for a clean slate. Instead, she wrote, "I don't want to be the first. I want to be the next. The next person who gets to know you where you are now, not who you were then." It was the kind of sentence that dissolves walls. Our first actual date came almost 2 months later. She invited me to the museum where she worked after hours. We wandered through silent halls, empty but humming with history. She showed me hidden exhibits, whispered facts that never made it to placards. Let me touch a preserved artifact with gloved hands. Under the dim security lights of the sculpture gallery, we kissed for the first time. Surrounded by the frozen expressions of 100 stone faces. And for the first time, I felt truly seen. Elle didn't try to change me. She didn't shrink away from my past. If anything, she held it with respect, like an old book with worn pages. She understood that people are layered, that love isn't about editing out what came before, but about embracing what remains. With her, I stopped trying to be healed. I just started being. Still, I worried. Not because of her, but because of me. Because I had loved deeply before. I had built dreams with others. I had said forever and meant it, only to watch it scatter. I told her once, late at night, "What if I break again?" She ran her fingers through my hair and said, "Then we rebuild, not back to who you were, but into who you're becoming." That became our unspoken vow. Not permanence, not certainty, but presence. As the seasons changed, so did we. We traveled together. Small trips at first. Weekend getaways to places without phone reception. She took photos of me while I read. I sketched her when she wasn't looking. We made art from each other, not in grand masterpieces, but in sticky notes on mirrors, in playlists curated for rainy days, in Sunday mornings spent in shared silence. It wasn't loud love. It was rooted. And for once, I didn't need to define it. It just was. One evening, while watching a storm roll across the horizon from her balcony, Elle said something I'll never forget. "You know, maybe love is just a series of threads. Each one teaches you how to hold the next better." I thought of the thread that had begun at the train station, the one that led me through pain, through Clara, through solitude, and now to her. And I realized something. Maybe the thread hadn't broken. Maybe it had always been leading me here. I used to believe that the stories we lived through were either linear or circular, that we either moved forward towards something final or returned to beginning, like an old song stuck on repeat. But life, real unpredictable life, doesn't follow any neat shape. It weaves, it tangles, it frays and knots and sometimes pulls so tight you think it might snap. But if you follow it long enough, you realize the thread never really breaks. It just changes texture. Elle and I built something unlike anything I had before. It wasn't perfect. That word doesn't belong to people, only to fantasies. But it was deeply, beautifully human. We learned how to navigate each other's scars. Not by ignoring them, but by learning the stories they told. Hers were quieter, more internal. Wounds left by trust broken early in life, by people who used her openness as leverage. Mine were louder, more visible, ghosts I'd already named but hadn't fully released. And yet, somehow we found harmony in our hauntedness. The nights we didn't talk were just as important as the ones where we poured ourselves out. Elle understood that silence wasn't always absence. It was sometimes just a breath between sentences. She never asked me to perform my healing for her, never measured my love by how quickly I could forget what came before. That was the gift of her presence. She never competed with my past. She simply added to my future. We moved in together that spring. It wasn't dramatic or marked by some milestone. One weekend turned into two, a drawer turned into a dresser, toothbrushes multiplied. And before we knew it, we were living inside the same rhythm. Mornings with mismatched socks and burnt toast. Evenings curled under the same blanket, reading different books but reaching for each other with the same hand. There was one night I remember above all others. The kind that sticks, not because it was extraordinary, but because it was honest. We were sitting on the floor of our kitchen. A thunderstorm rumbled outside, shaking the old windows. The power had gone out, so we lit candles and shared a bottle of wine we'd been saving for no real reason. In the flicker of soft light, Elle asked me, "Do you still think of them?" She didn't have to say who. I knew. I could have lied, could have said no and spared us the pause that followed. But we'd never been that kind of love. "Yes," I said. "Sometimes." Not because I missed them, but because they were part of my becoming. She nodded, took a sip, and smiled without resentment. "That's fair. I think of mine too. And I hope they're okay. I hope they're also sitting somewhere with someone and not pretending to be whole when they're not." There it was. Truth, weightless and unafraid. That night, I realized that love isn't about replacing what was lost. It's about making space for what's real now. Elle didn't demand to be my only story. She just wanted to be the one I wrote next, fully, without erasure. And I wanted that too. We didn't rush toward forever, but we started talking about it. Not in the sweeping, romantic way of youth, but with the quiet deliberateness of people who've broken before and know the cost of a promise. She joked once, "I don't need a ring, just a spare key and a spare heart." I gave her both figuratively and then, quite literally. Our apartment became a scrapbook. Not of souvenirs, but of routines. The way we always left one corner of the bed unmade. The crooked frame in the hallway we never fixed because it made her laugh. The playlist we built over months, with no theme but the feeling of being known. I never imagined domesticity could be sacred. But with Elle, even grocery lists felt like a love letter. But then, just as everything felt stable, life being life, something shifted again. This time not in her, in me. It started with a message. A name I hadn't seen in over a year. Clara. It came late one evening while Elle was at her sister's. Just a few words. "I'm sorry to disturb you." I didn't know who else to tell. My mother passed away. "I thought you should know." I sat there staring at the screen, the way one stares at an open door, unsure whether to walk through it or close it forever. My first instinct wasn't pain or longing. It was a hollow thud in my chest. I hadn't thought about Clara in months. Not really. She'd become a soft echo. But now, she was back, if only for a moment and not for me. I responded with compassion, nothing more. Just, "I'm so sorry." She was kind to me. "I hope you have people around you right now. Take care of yourself." There was no reply. There didn't need to be. And yet, the message lingered like a fingerprint. It reminded me of who I had been, what I had felt, how far I had traveled. When Elle came home, I told her. Not because I had to, but because I wanted to. She didn't flinch. She didn't ask to see the message. She just sat beside me, rested her head on my shoulder, and said, "That must have felt strange." I nodded, "Yeah, it did. But I'm okay." And I was. That's when I knew. Not that I loved Elle, I had known that for a while, but that she had become home. Not just a person, a place, a safe one. A place I could return to without question, without fear. A place that wouldn't crumble at the first tremor of the past. Weeks later, we were walking through a park at dusk. She was humming a song I didn't know, barefoot in the grass because she'd kicked her shoes off on impulse. She turned to me suddenly and asked, "If you could go back and change any part of your life, would you?" And without thinking, I answered no, because it all brought me here, to this exact moment. She smiled and grabbed my hand, her fingers cold from the breeze. "I was hoping you'd say that." That night, I wrote in my journal, a habit I'd returned to quietly in the background of our life. Love used to feel like fire. Now it feels like air, everywhere, invisible, essential. I no longer burn. I breathe. Eventually, we did get married. Not because of pressure or timelines, but because we woke up one morning and realized we wanted to walk toward every future holding the same hand. We did it our way. Small, intimate, barefoot on a beach with no guests but the waves. Elle wore a blue dress and held a notebook instead of flowers. She read me a poem she wrote the night we met. I read her a letter I had written the day she moved in. We exchanged rings that didn't match, because neither did we, and that was the beauty of it. Afterward, we stayed on the sand until the tide kissed our feet, talking about how we both once thought we'd never love again, how wrong we'd been. Years passed. Life continued its pattern. Soft joys, occasional grief, surprises we never planned for, some threads tangled, others frayed. But we held on. One evening, years later, I was cleaning out an old drawer when I found something, tucked in the back, yellowed with time. The letter Clara had left in that poetry book. I hadn't seen it in ages. I read it again, slowly, and for the first time, I didn't feel a single H, just a smile. Not of regret, but of gratitude. Elle walked in, saw the letter in my hand, and tilted her head. "Is that hers?" I nodded. "The girl from the train station." She sat beside me, resting her chin on my shoulder. "Want to keep it?" I thought for a moment. Then I folded it carefully and slipped it back into the drawer. Yeah, it's part of the story, but it's not the ending. And it wasn't. Because endings aren't real. They're just moments where the thread turns, where it weaves into something new. And love, true, evolving, forgiving love, will always find its way back to the hands willing to hold it. Enjoyed the video? Give it a thumbs up, subscribe to the channel, and tap the bell so you never miss an update.